In the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut, Janel Grant, plaintiff, versus World Wrestling Entertainment, now known as World Wrestling Entertainment, LLC, Vincent Kennedy McMahon and John Laurinaitis, defendants. Complaint. Plaintiff Janel Grant, by and through her undersigned counsel, hereby files this complaint against defendants World Wrestling Entertainment Incorporated, World Wrestling Entertainment, LLC, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, and John Laurinaitis, alleging as follows. Introduction. Plaintiff Janel Grant is a former employee of WWE who is the victim of physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault, and trafficking at WWE. Ms. Grant is filing this lawsuit not just to address her own suffering, but also to act for those who are afraid to speak out. WWE's billionaire founder and executive chairman, defendant Vincent Kennedy McMahon, lived in a penthouse duplex in Ms. Grant's apartment building. The two met in March 2019 when Ms. Grant was dealing with profound grief and struggling financially over devoting years to around-the-clock caregiving. Her parents passed away. On top of that, she was unemployed and her family home was lost in her parents' bankruptcy. After her family passed away, Ms. Grant dedicated herself to finding gainful employment. Neighbors in her building provided career advice and sought her assistance with personal events. Ms. Grant used these non-paying roles in volunteer work and community initiatives to build her resume. The building's resident manager wanted to help. She messaged McMahon to ask whether he would talk to her, sharing that Ms. Grant had been through hardship and would do great things if given a fresh start. McMahon enthusiastically responded, "Hell yes." McMahon befriended Ms. Grant, giving her hopes of a new life with promises of a yet-to-be-determined role at WWE and showering her with attention and assurances, along with gifts like a VIP experience at WrestleMania. But what seemed like a dream in the spring of 2019 quickly became a nightmare. As McMahon dangled career-making and life-changing promises in front of Ms. Grant, he demonstrated a lack of boundaries. During several meetings that were ostensibly about a potential job at WWE, he greeted her in his underwear, touched her, repeatedly asked for hugs, and spent hours sharing intimate details about his personal life. McMahon warned Ms. Grant to keep their closeness secret, lest rumors lead to public trouble, and added that while he protects loyal people, he had world-class legal resources on speed dial to deal with people who became a problem. As such, when McMahon pushed Ms. Grant for a physical relationship in return for long-promised employment at WWE, she felt trapped in an impossible situation, submitting to McMahon's sexual demands or facing ruin. Ms. Grant feared that she had everything to lose and faced negative consequences no matter what happened. After succumbing to the pressure for a physical relationship, Ms. Grant was slotted into an entry-level position as an administrator coordinator, a position McMahon created for her in WWE's legal department. Ms. Grant began work in that role in June 17, 2019. Ms. Grant remained in that role with the exception of a temporary relocation to XFL, the Extreme Football League, until McMahon verbally directed her to transfer to the Talent Relations Department, reporting to defendant John Laurinaitis on March 9, 2021. During a conversation the same day, McMahon explained that her presence in the legal department was effectively delaying efforts to hire a new general counsel for the company. McMahon and Laurinaitis informed Ms. Grant that she would be promoted to vice president of the operations in the talent relation department, providing her with organizational charts reflecting this decision. Shortly after, they informed her that they needed her to begin at a lower level as a director, but promised her a promotion to vice president after a 12-month period. Despite Ms. Grant's expressions of unhappiness and attempts to end the sexual relationship, and while she came to understand that McMahon expected the physical relationship to continue as part of her employment, she had no idea how sordid it would become, nor how the psychological torture and physical violence would leave her feeling helpless, isolated, and trapped. In March 2020, McMahon began sharing sexually explicit photographs and videos of Ms. Grant, including pornographic content that he recorded, with other men inside and outside of the company, including with members of the television production tech team, executive producers, and world-famous athlete and former UFC heavyweight champion with whom WWE was actively trying to sign to a new contract and ultimately did sign to that contract. Given McMahon's omnipotent position at WWE, coercion was inherent in his increasingly depraved sexual demands. Specifically, while McMahon was CEO of WWE and Ms. Grant was employed as an entry-level coordinator in the legal department, McMahon recruited individuals to have sexual relations with Ms. Grant and or with the two of them directed Ms. Grant to visit defendant Laurinaitis prior to the start of workdays for sexual encounters, and expected and directed Ms. Grant to engage in sexual activity at the WWE headquarters, even during working hours. All this time, McMahon ordered Ms. Grant to keep their relationship secret, unless otherwise instructed, including lying to maintain whatever cover stories he fabricated. McMahon's assurances that Ms. Grant was safe and independent rang hollow in light of his efforts to isolate her from friends and attempts to chip away at her identity until it was replaced with his desired role for her as his bitch, his fantasy, and or his porn star, while occasionally intermixing softer descriptors like girlfriend, baby, even love when convenient. He exercised complete ownership and control over both her personal and professional lives. McMahon was also subjecting Mrs. Grant to acts of extreme cruelty and degradation that caused Mrs. Grant to dissociate and or become numb to reality in order to survive the horrific encounters. As one example of McMahon's extreme depravity, on May 9, 2020, he defecated on Mrs. Grant during a threesome and then commanded her to continue pleasuring his friend with feces covered in her hair, running down her back, while McMahon went to the bathroom to shower off. Upon his return from the bathroom, McMahon and his friend actively resumed the threesome, which lasted over an hour and a half while Miss Grant remained covered in McMahon's filth. When McMahon's friend left, McMahon ordered her to stay and continue to sexually gratify him. On June 2021, McMahon and defendant Laurinaitis sexually assaulted Mrs. Grant inside Laurinaitis' office in WWE headquarters while colleagues were busy at their desk. Behind a locked door, the two men cornered her and pulled her in between them, forcibly touched her, before ultimately putting her on top of a table between them. She begged them to stop, but they forced themselves upon her, each taking turns restraining her for the other while saying no means yes and take it, bitch. Unsurprisingly, others at WWE knew what was going on, but instead of intervening to protect Miss Grant, WWE actively sought to conceal the wrongdoing. In January 2022, McMahon told Miss Grant that his wife had found out about their relationship. Purportedly, to avoid divorce, negative publicity, and other repercussions, McMahon said that Miss Grant's time at WWE was at an end, but that he wanted her to sign an NDA to ensure her silence on, among other things, his personal misconduct. In the days ahead, McMahon put Miss Grant under immense pressure to sign, saying that refusing would not only jeopardize McMahon, his family, and the company, but that she'd surely become a public headline, suffer reputational ruin, including from the pornographic content Mr. McMahon had captured, and face McMahon's legal resources. Conversely, McMahon reassured her that her signature would ensure his continued support and protection and safeguard her reputation. Ultimately, Miss Grant succumbed to the pressure and signed the NDA in exchange for payments, which McMahon later stopped making. Even after pushing Miss Grant out of the company and muzzling her with an NDA, McMahon continued efforts to exploit her, including attempting to traffic her to a WWE star who would be in New York City for a live event and TV taping in March of 2022. Understandably, defendant's predatory conduct has left Miss Grant crippled, both physically and mentally, including from debilitating symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and suicidal ideation. These symptoms led to her termination from her subsequent job running her building's operations due to her inability to leave home for weeks at a time. Despite McMahon's promise of reputational protection, WWE appears to have leaked information that led to the public disclosure of her name by a media blogger who cited a source in WWE with direct knowledge of the situation, which, upon information and belief, was an overt intimidation tactic aimed at Miss Grant. WWE has also attempted to sweep the matter under the rug. Following media reports that McMahon was involved in a hush money payment scandal, WWE released a statement in June of 2022 to announce that a special committee of its board of directors was investigating the alleged misconduct and appointing Stephanie McMahon as interim CEO and interim chairwoman. In this capacity, Ms. McMahon publicly affirmed her commitment to doing everything in her power to help the special committee complete its work and to implement its findings. She also declared the importance of a safe and collaborative workplace. Notwithstanding this public statement, the investigation was a sham. In November 2022, WWE touted the conclusion of the special committee investigation into the misconduct, yet the special committee never even bothered to interview Ms. Grant or request any documents despite Ms. Grant stating that she would cooperate. In SEC filings, the company tried to divert attention away from McMahon's abuse of women by focusing on the technical issue of how hush money was accounted for, In the words of the company, the issue was immaterial accounting errors related to certain payments that Mr. McMahon agreed to make during the period from 2006 to 2022. Through all this trauma, Ms. Grant endured the profound suffering in silence, feeling of exploitation, loss of security, and the fear of facing the wrath of WWE and McMahon's army of attorneys if she were to come forward and bring to light the egregious acts detailed herein. That time has passed, and Ms. Grant seeks to hold defendants accountable for their reprehensible and unlawful acts for her own sake and for others. Ms. Grant seeks a declaratory judgment that her NDA is invalid under federal and state laws and asserts claims to other laws, including the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Line 34, Parties. Plaintiff Janel Grant, a Connecticut citizen, is a former employee of WWE, having worked there from June 2019 to March 2022. Defendant Vincent K. McMahon, a Connecticut citizen, co-founded WWE in 1980 and served on the board of directors of WWE from 1980 to September of 2023. He is currently the executive chairman of the board of TKO Group Holdings, LLC. Defendant World Wrestling Entertainment Incorporated, also known as World Wrestling Entertainment LLC, WWE, is a Delaware limited liability company whose sole managing member is TKO Group Holdings Incorporated, aka TKO, a Delaware corporation. Until on or about September 12, 2023, WWE was a Delaware corporation with headquarters in Connecticut. On September 12, 2023, a transaction completed between Endeavor Group Holdings and World Wrestling Entertainment Incorporated resulted in a merger between the WWE and Ultimate Fighting Championship, aka UFC promotions, and the formation of their new parent company, TKO. Defendant John Laurinaitis, an Arizona citizen, is the former head of talent relations and general manager at WWE, who on information and belief was officially dismissed by WWE in August of 2022 amid allegations of misconduct by women in WWE. Line 38, non-party officers, employees of WWE. At all times relevant, WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 was a high-ranking employee at WWE who made hiring decisions, conducted prospective employee interviews, and maintained significant control over personnel decisions. WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 worked in these capacities during Mrs. Grant's employment with WWE. This individual is referred to herein as WWE Corporate Officer Number 2. At all times relevant, WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 was a high-ranking employee and board member at WWE during Mrs. Grant's employment with WWE. WWE Corporate Officer Number 1 continued to work in a high-ranking position in connection with a September 12, 2023 merger. This individual is referred to herein as WWE Corporate Officer Number 1. At all times relevant, WWE Corporate Officer Number 3 was a high-ranking employee and or board member during Mrs. Grant's employment with WWE. This individual is referred to herein as WWE Corporate Officer Number 3. At all times relevant, WWE Corporate Officer Number 4 was a high-ranking employee at WWE who worked with legal affairs at the company. WWE Corporate Officer Number 4 held that position from the time of Miss Grant's initial employment with the WWE until sometime in 2020. This individual is referred to herein as WWE Corporate Officer Number 4. WWE Superstar is a professional wrestling superstar who performs at WWE-branded wrestling events. During the time of Miss Grant's employment, McMahon signed WWE Superstar to a new booking contract with WWE. This individual is referred to herein as WWE Superstar. Jurisdiction and venue. This court has jurisdiction over this action pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1331 because Ms. Grant's claim under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, 18 U.S.C. 1591, 1595, aka TVPA, and her cause of action for declaratory relief under the Speak Out Act, 42 U.S.C. 19401, all raise a federal question. This court also has supplemental jurisdiction over Ms. Grant's state law claims pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1367 because the claims are so related to the TVPA claims as to form part of the same case or controversy. Venue is proper in this district pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1391b2 as a substantial part of the events or omissions giving rise to these claims occurred in the District of Connecticut. Factual allegations. Miss Grant's history with McMahon, Laurinaitis, and WWE. Miss Grant's introduction to McMahon turns into a 2-hour meeting between a potential entry-level employee and a billionaire CEO. Prior to having any involvement with WWE, Miss Grant was dealing with profound grief following the loss of her parents, who she cared for full-time as their sole caretaker. After her family passed away, Miss Grant dedicated herself to finding gainful employment. During this time, Miss Grant often ran into McMahon's 2 personal assistants in her building, one of whom was a former grade school classmate of Miss Grant. Miss Grant's closest friend in the building was a resident manager. The individual is referred to herein as resident manager. Similar in personality, Miss Grant and the resident manager bonded over stories of adversity as they coordinated community initiatives in the building together. Resident manager was aware of Miss Grant's efforts to obtain employment. In March 2019, Miss Grant remained unsuccessful in securing long-term employment. Resident manager offered to help Miss Grant, suggesting that she reach out to defendant McMahon in case he could assist, and texted him to see if he would be willing to speak with Miss Grant to provide advice about employment. McMahon responded enthusiastically and proposed times to meet Miss Grant to discuss employment. Resident manager passed along Miss Grant's resume to McMahon ahead of the prospective meeting. Ahead of the meeting, resident manager advised Miss Grant to be energetic, as McMahon is big on energy, and to talk to McMahon no differently than she talks to resident manager. On or about March 23, 2019, Miss Grant arrived for their meeting in Vince McMahon's condo with additional printed copies of her resume, a black notepad, and thank you cookies. Sitting at his dining table, McMahon looked at Miss Grant's resume and complimented both her communication skills and common sense before discussing little but their personal lives. For example, Miss Grant told Mr. McMahon about the hardship that led to resident manager's offer to help and described losing her parents, her family's bankruptcy, and other trauma that led her to seek financial independence to ensure she would never experience losing her home again. McMahon shared stories about his upbringing, his traumatic childhood, growing up in poverty, and current family dynamics, including his separation from Linda McMahon, described as his ex and long gone. He added his marital status is an arrangement on paper for business purposes, and that he lives a quiet, isolated existence outside of WWE. At the end of the meeting, McMahon told Miss Grant that he didn't just want to give her a job, but give her a life, quote-unquote, and that he would find a place for her at WWE. Stunned, Miss Grant said that she didn't know how to thank him for possibly just changing my life, quote-unquote. McMahon responded that one simple thank you is enough and that he'd accept a hug. They stood and embraced. McMahon then told Miss Grant that he'd get the ball rolling, quote-unquote, on next steps, but it was a busy time of the year for WWE as they prepared for WrestleMania, explaining that it was WWE's Super Bowl. He then invited Miss Grant to attend as his guest along with resident manager and added that he would personally select their seat to have the best possible experience. McMahon advised her that his office would reach out to her to set up a meeting with a trusted official, WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 at WWE headquarters. After asking her if her cell was the best number to reach her, McMahon shared his personal phone number with Miss Grant, walked her to his door, and again hugged her while whispering, quote-unquote, so good. McMahon arranges for Miss Grant to be hired by WWE while beginning to groom her for sexual exploitation. On March 31st, 2019, the day before Miss Grant was scheduled to meet with WWE Corporate Officer Number 2, McMahon unexpectedly invited Miss Grant to come back to his condo for pointers for her meeting with Corporate Officer Number 2. When she arrived, McMahon gave a huge embrace and suggested they sit on the couch. It quickly became clear that Mr. McMahon had no intention of giving her pointers for an interview except for a single direction. If the topic comes up during her meeting, Miss Grant could state they had met through a mutual friend, quote-unquote. During this meeting, McMahon described a surgery he had on his knee by touching Miss Grant's leg and drawing a line where the surgery had taken place with his finger. He stated that similar to rehabbing an injury, Miss Grant cannot let scar tissue build up inside of her from trauma, as her vulnerability is a gift. McMahon explains that people are intimidated around him and are afraid to touch him. McMahon added that he is an affectionate person who likes to hug and starves for physical attention, quote-unquote. McMahon then led Miss Grant on a tour of his condo before hugging her goodbye, again whispering, feels so good. On April 1st, 2019, Miss Grant met with WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 at WWE headquarters for a short time. WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 hardly asked any questions, saying that WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 was figuring out where Miss Grant would be placed, and then promised to be in touch again after WrestleMania. Later that day, Miss Grant texted McMahon and enthusiastically described her meeting with WWE Corporate Officer Number 2. She also commented on a dinosaur skull that she saw on McMahon's office wall, prompting his response, "By the way, if you're a bad girl, the T-Rex will eat you." followed by Seriously Janel, wherever you land in WWE, you will be a credit to the organization. I'd like to point out as an aside note that your is spelled U-R and you is spelled with an uppercase U. Back to the complaint. On April 7th, 2019, Ms. Grant and resident manager were provided a VIP experience at WrestleMania, including private transportation in a black SUV arranged by McMahon. Per McMahon's instructions, Ms. Grant diligently took notes about her impressions from WrestleMania, her first time attending such an event. Ms. Grant left overwhelmed with emotion and feeling hopeful that everything McMahon promised was becoming a reality. Over the next several weeks, McMahon invited Mrs. Grant to his condo on several occasions, each time assuring her that he would find the right position for her at WWE. For each meeting with McMahon, Ms. Grant brought sample job descriptions she found online to review with him and demonstrate the types of roles she might fit in. McMahon listened to Ms. Grant, asked her questions, pointed out qualities that he described as rare gifts, including her goodness, vivaciousness, childlike innocence, and her ability to be quote-unquote vulnerable, all things that made her an easy target. McMahon also initiated long physical embraces with Ms. Grant, repeatedly telling her that he trusted her, that he could be himself around her, and how he'd opened his home to her. During one visit to the condo in late April 2019, McMahon did not greet Ms. Grant when she entered, but instead called her to his master walk-in closet. As soon as she turned the corner, McMahon emerged from his bathroom wearing only briefs. Shocked, Ms. Grant turned around and apologized as McMahon laughed and asked her to turn around. He then handed her a shirt and asked her for help with the buttons. McMahon reminded her that he was working on her role and said he felt good about her taking care of him. Around that time, McMahon also told Ms. Grant that he would never forget how helpless she looked when they first met, that he wanted to wrap his arms around her, and assured her that everything is going to be okay, and that Ms. Grant's problems were in the past. McMahon also told Ms. Grant that he viewed her as a true friend. However, McMahon advised Ms. Grant that the people at WWE could never know about their closeness, or else rumors would spawn and threaten them, particularly due to Ms. Grant's physical beauty. McMahon also emphasized that circumstances could jeopardize the company. Around this time, he mentioned that he had an attorney on speed dial whom he described as the best of the best at making problems, including people who become problems, go away. On April 21st, 2019, McMahon unexpectedly invited Miss Grant to his condo to provide her with an update. Upon her arrival, McMahon assured Miss Grant that he was a man of his word, that his office would be in touch with her as soon as possible with the right role. As she turned to leave, McMahon grabbed a large black electric massager and told Miss Grant to turn around for a demonstration. He quickly moved to rubbing his hands on Miss Grant's upper back before reminding her that she would hear from his office about next steps in a day or two. 2 days later, Ms. Grant was contacted about further meetings at WWE. A week later, she met with 2 high-ranking human resource employees, referred to herein as Human Resources Employee Number 1 and HR Employee Number 2, respectively. Both Human Resources Employee Number 1 and Human Resources Employee Number 2 provided Ms. Grant with their impressions about company culture at WWE and confirmed that the ball was in their court to figure out where she would be the best fit at WWE. On May 5th, 2019, Ms. Grant visited McMahon's condo again, and the topic of bucket lists came up, during which Ms. Grant expressed that she always dreamed of attending the Belmont Stakes. McMahon responded that he would personally acquire 2 tickets for her, which Ms. Grant said she could not accept. McMahon then stood up from his chair and knelt in the front of the chair where Ms. Grant was seated, blocking her from standing. He leaned close to Ms. Grant and told her to kiss him. Ms. Grant paused and gave McMahon a kiss on the cheek, to which McMahon sighed, quote, "That's not what I meant," unquote. After McMahon walked off to his bedroom and said that he wanted Miss Grant, she swiftly rejected his advances and tried to reason with him that he was putting her in a bad position. Miss Grant pled with McMahon to stop and think about what he was doing. McMahon then begged repeatedly simply to hold Miss Grant. Out of fear for her employment and his earlier implied threats about his legal team dealing with problems, Miss Grant lay down on the bed next to McMahon and kept her hands clasped and ankles crossed, as she acquiesced in saying that he could only hold her, but nothing more. When Miss Grant tried to make small talk about WWE's TV storylines, McMahon suggested that she watch the next episode of Monday Night Raw and text him before the broadcast. After she agreed, he forcibly kissed her and began pulling down a strap on her sweater. Miss Grant then sat up, said she needed to leave and had a lot to process, then left. The next day, Miss Grant watched the show as promised and texted McMahon to wish him well. She was shocked when he appeared on the show and texted back in the middle of the live broadcast. "That was a very nice message. Made me smile. Smiley face, smiley face." On May 9th, 2019, McMahon texted Ms. Grant that she will have a job at WWE by that Friday. The next day, Human Resources employee number 2 called Ms. Grant to inform her that the WWE corporate officer number 4 would contact her at 4 p.m. to discuss a legal role. After her call with WWE corporate officer number 4, Ms. Grant sent McMahon a thumbs-up text message to indicate the call went well. Around 7 p.m., WWE corporate officer number 4 unexpectedly called her a second time and formally offered her a job, saying, "Welcome to WWE." On May 11th, 2019, McMahon invited Ms. Grant to his condo again and asked her to lay in bed with him before informing her that he had ordered WWE corporate officer number 4 to offer her the job, even though a job description had not been firmed up beyond a high-level summary. While incredibly excited to finally receive long-awaited employment and financial security, Mrs. Grant expressed to McMahon that there seemed to be a conflict between his doing this and his warning Ms. Grant that no one could know about their closeness. He appeared amused with this, replying, "It's my company." McMahon then undressed down to his briefs while Miss Grant remained clothed, and he began kissing Miss Grant and inserting his hands into her pants without consent. On May 16th, 2019, McMahon informed Ms. Grant that he had obtained 2 tickets to the Belmont Stakes scheduled for June 8th, 2019. On May 17th, 2019, Ms. Grant received an offer letter from WWE for an entry-level job as a legal administrator coordinator with a salary of $75,000. On May 18th, 2019, McMahon summoned Ms. Grant to his condo when she brought a printed copy of the offer letter to review with him. McMahon informed Ms. Grant that her new boss, a WWE employee who worked in risk and government relations, referred to herein as WWE employee number 1, was a decades-long family friend and confidant, similar in age to McMahon and one of a small original group, what McMahon called the Titan family, who helped the WWE expand from a regional promotion to a global juggernaut. McMahon stated that outside of his attorney, WWE employee number 1 was the most feared figure in the company because WWE employee number 1 usually fired employees. Beyond that, he offered little detail about what WWE employee number 1's role was at WWE. Instead, he focused on WWE employee number 1's personal traumas, explaining that similar to Ms. Grant, WWE employee number 1 has no family left after number 1's spouse passed away, and that the McMahons and WWE were number 1's surrogate family. McMahon touted WWE employee number 1's loyalty, saying that number 1 would be able to protect Ms. Grant, and led her to his bedroom while giving her the command of, "Please, don't stop this," quote-unquote. During the May 18, 2019 encounter, Ms. Grant felt coerced into engaging in sexual activity and that Mr. McMahon had trapped her in an impossible situation, as she feared adverse career and personal consequences and legal retaliation if she declined his advances. McMahon stated, "This is what I have been waiting for," quote-unquote, as he performed oral sex on Ms. Grant. Ms. Grant asked that protection be used, and McMahon responded that there was no need to worry because he was, quote, "clean," unquote. Feeling that she was being used for his gratification, Ms. Grant went numb and was unable to make eye contact. McMahon then flipped on his back and said, "Okay, jack 'em off," quote, unquote. Disturbed by the non-consensual sexual encounter, she hoped that McMahon would cease his advances. But his advances continued and left her to fulfill his demands or lose her job. On June 16, 2019, the day before starting with WWE, Ms. Grant attempted to shut down any further physical contact or sexual encounters by admitting to McMahon her unhappiness and concern starting her first ever job in his legal department, no less, while in a physical relationship with the chairman and CEO. She requested that they end any physical relationship while remaining friends to avoid any risks to either of them. McMahon refused, saying that it was not ending, it did not need to, and that he did not ever envision it ending. He reminded her that he trusted her, reiterated that rumors would lead to trouble, probed whether her silence would be an issue, and brushed off her concerns that she was struggling with the feeling that her job felt unearned. McMahon told Miss Grant that all she needed to do was not tell anyone, that it just has to look legit. McMahon then spun the conversation and told Miss Grant to focus on the positives and embrace that her life was about to change, saying, "Isn't that what you've always wanted?" McMahon manipulatively emphasized that she's about to start an adventure and gain a new new family with the WWE as a surrogate for the family that she had lost. Ultimately, Miss Grant's unsuccessful attempt to end further unwanted physical contact quickly taught her that her view did not matter and was not relevant. Miss Grant's WWE career commences: minimal work and an absent boss. On June 17, 2019, Miss Grant reported to WWE headquarters for her first day of work. With attorneys in glass offices and support staff in cubicles with low walls and tall monitors, it was easy to see how much other colleagues worked. As a quiet and small department, it was even easier to overhear their conversations. Miss Grant was immediately surprised that there was not much work assigned to her, struggling even to appear busy in her new role. In stark contrast to colleagues who complained about overflowing inboxes, Miss Grant's phone only overflowed with controlling and sexually charged text messages from the chairman and CEO, reminding her both of McMahon's power and ever-present surveillance. Colleagues shared onboarding stories with Miss Grant and talked about receiving pre-made binders of information or opportunity to shadow departing employees, none of which happened for Miss Grant, nor did anyone know what her unusual title of Administrator Coordinator meant. Miss Grant did not even meet WWE employee number 1 until her second week of employment. WWE employee number 1 was a lively individual who frequently regaled the legal department with stories of others at WWE. If McMahon's name was mentioned, WWE employee number 1 would turn to Miss Grant with a smile, a finger point, and/or comment that drew attention to her connection to McMahon, such as, "She knows what I'm talking about." WWE employee number 1 and Miss Grant bonded as quickly as McMahon had predicted. Miss Grant, referred to as partner, was taught words to live by in WWE, including, "We do what's in the best interests of the company, protect the business, and if McMahon wants something, the answer isn't no, but how do we make that happen?" WWE employee number 1 also impressed on Miss Grant that job titles, quote, "don't mean anything" for members of McMahon's inner circle, which she was clearly considered to be a part of. As employee number 1 was seldom in the office and required little administrative support, Miss Grant indirectly to another employee within the legal department, referred to herein as employee number 2, who provided her with the occasional projects related to talent appearances in XFL that helped fill Miss Grant's time. Based on her hiring alone, WWE corporate officer number 4 was on notice that there was something different about Miss Grant, namely her connection to McMahon. As Miss Grant feared and had expressed to McMahon, she was unhappy that a spotlight was unnecessarily put on her before she ever set foot in the office. Miss Grant immediately noticed that WWE corporate officer number 4 was warm with other colleagues, but cold towards her. Beginning in July 2019, after Miss Grant raised an issue related to XFL's performance-enhancing drug policy with McMahon, WWE corporate officer number 4's behavior shifted from cold to actively hostile. If Miss Grant walked into a room while WWE corporate officer number 4 was laughing with colleagues, number 4's expression immediately became blank and number 4 would walk away. If officer number 4 and Miss Grant walked towards each other in the hallway, WWE corporate officer number 4 stopped and changed directions. Colleagues noticed this shift in behavior. While some commented on it to Miss Grant, others emulated it. Notwithstanding the issues detailed above, Miss Grant took her employment seriously. In contrast, McMahon continued a pattern of sending sexually charged messages throughout the work week. Certain her employment depended on her continued appeasement and obedience to McMahon, and believing she needed McMahon's protection from the suspicious WWE corporate officer number 4 and others, Miss Grant felt no choice but to respond in kind. From all this, Miss Grant began to experience debilitating panic attacks in the office on a near-daily basis that left her physically drained. She could not hide the physical symptoms of these attacks and texted resident manager, "You should see the way people look at me when I'm having an attack." But while her coworkers noticed, no one dared to get involved. McMahon's coercive control tactics to sexualize and dehumanize Miss Grant. In the summer of 2019, McMahon's presence was all-consuming in Miss Grant's life. In the office, she felt monitored as she was surrounded by allies of McMahon, which led to continued daily panic attacks. Outside the office, McMahon sexualized her entirely. He no longer referred to her as a friend and largely stopped talking to Miss Grant outside of sexting and fantasy talk. Any non-sexual texts related to life or other work were either ignored or given token responses like okay or yup. As detailed herein, McMahon was adamant about having Miss Grant send him explicit photographs, impressing upon her that it was part of her sexuality. Given the control that McMahon had over Miss Grant's employment, she felt compelled to comply and sent the explicit photographs to McMahon's mobile device. Miss Grant was routinely assured that the photographs she was providing to McMahon were to remain private and were part of their, quote, secret world, unquote. McMahon began to degrade Miss Grant, calling her his bitch, while hinting at a fascination with having other people watch them engage in sexual activity. Additionally, this complaint details encounters during which McMahon caused Miss Grant to sustain physical injuries, including bleeding and pain from forceful use of sex toys. Despite Miss Grant's plea to cease any further sexual activity, the number of sexual encounters increased, as did McMahon's physical aggression during them. Notably, McMahon was most aggressive when using certain sex toys named after male WWE wrestlers and performers. McMahon named the sex toys so that the color of the toy matched the race of the wrestler. For example, a black dildo would be named after an African American wrestler, and a white dildo would be named after a Caucasian wrestler. In addition to McMahon's infatuation with pretending that other men, and namely certain WWE talent, were in the room with them, this was yet another incremental step in desensitizing Miss Grant to his fantasy and eventual demands that she perform sexual acts for and or have sexual contact with others within WWE. During a David vs. Goliath type wrestling match in 2019, Miss Grant shared with McMahon her thoughts on the event, the draw of rooting for the underdog, and ideas for future events. McMahon complimented her creative input. She believed she was being taken seriously, that is, until McMahon named a dildo after the smaller wrestler and attempted to sexualize the situation, diminishing her input. By fall of 2019, McMahon frequently pressed for pornographic videos and more explicit content. When Miss Grant expressed apprehension with these requests, McMahon responded with assurances that she could trust him, or questioned why she didn't trust him. McMahon also took care to remind Miss Grant of his power and influence, such as by flaunting a meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince in October of 2019. McMahon tightens his grip on Miss Grant and discredits her doctor, replacing him with one of McMahon's choosing. In addition to her panic attacks, Miss Grant began experiencing increasingly severe physical, mental, and emotional symptoms, including sleep disruption, dizziness, exhaustion, rashes, weight loss, hair loss, and migraine. In November 2019, Miss Grant informed McMahon that her doctor suggested that her symptoms stemmed from trauma and ongoing stress. McMahon mocked her, "Emotional trauma my ass," quote unquote. However, on November 20th, 2019, McMahon insisted that Miss Grant see a physician of his choosing. This physician is referred to herein as Celebrity Doctor, and the facility that Celebrity Doctor operated from is referred to herein as Alternative Clinic. McMahon and Celebrity Doctor assured Grant that her bills at Alternative Clinic would be taken care of under McMahon's account. After the initial visit, it became apparent to Miss Grant that McMahon and Celebrity Doctor wanted Miss Grant to remain in the care of Celebrity Doctor's practice, and Miss Grant felt pressured to do so. Celebrity Doctor made comments about how Celebrity Doctor, they referring to McMahon and Alternative Clinic, had saved her life, quote unquote, and Celebrity Doctor often remarked how Miss Grant was unable to even make eye contact with him during their initial sessions. An obvious sign of trauma, he said. Miss Grant acknowledged having a relationship with McMahon during visits with Celebrity Doctor, who gave little reaction, save telling her there were many different paths to God and love. Celebrity Doctor lavished attention, treatments, and products on Miss Grant, all of which were paid for under Vince McMahon's account. Miss Grant was never provided with any receipts. When Miss Grant inquired about certain treatments provided, Celebrity Doctor challenged her on whether she trusted him and postured that if she didn't trust him, then we should part ways right now. At the outset of her care with Celebrity Doctor, each session lasted up to an hour. Miss Grant would leave feeling exhausted from Celebrity Doctor's deep dives into her personal and work life as a coach, quote unquote, focused on behavioral science. In 2020, McMahon voices concern about rumors, then publicly exploits her and Miss Grant's desperate attempts to leave WWE. On January 30th, 2020, WWE issued a press release announcing that the company's co-presidents, George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, were departing the company and would no longer serve on its board of directors. A significant drop in WWE's stock price followed. The company announced that Frank Riddick III, a member of the board of directors more than 11 years, would be interim chief financial officer and report directly to McMahon. On February 3, 2020, McMahon sent a message to Miss Grant advising that he'd been informed by WWE Corporate Officer Number 2 that there were a lot of rumors circulating about McMahon and Miss Grant. McMahon warned Miss Grant that rumors were not good for either of them. Then, on February 10, 2020, without any advance warning, Miss Grant was temporarily relocated to the XFL workforce. Miss Grant, having been desperate to escape the feeling of being trapped in her existence at WWE, applied to remain with the XFL on March 6, 2020, as she openly vocalized her desire to remain with XFL to colleagues, even referring to her state of work at WWE as nothingness, and she sought permission to make the change official from WWE employee number 1 and corporate officer number 4 before informing McMahon. Days after this, during which time she had finally told McMahon about her application to remain with the XFL, her request was denied. In the weeks that followed, despite McMahon's warning about rumors and direction to Miss Grant to play dumb, he began showing explicit photos of Miss Grant to people both inside and outside of the company. On March 26th, 2020, McMahon sent a lengthy message to Miss Grant describing in detail the circumstances surrounding sharing explicit photographs of Miss Grant to a former WWE referee, referred to herein as WWE referee. McMahon described how WWE referee left to masturbate and told Miss Grant that she had made a perfect stranger very happy. Miss Grant initially dismissed this as mere fantasy talk, believing that McMahon would not actually do such a reckless thing. But when she voiced apprehension about McMahon sharing naked photos of her with someone she did not know, McMahon's response was not to comfort her, but to assure her of WWE referee's loyalty to him. This sharing of explicit photos terrified Miss Grant, as it illustrated McMahon's sheer lack of self-control, and it further panicked her that these private and intimate photos, which included her face, were being shared with complete strangers. On March 30th, 2020, McMahon enthusiastically messaged Miss Grant that the WWE referee had showed a friend a naked photo of Miss Grant, which marked the beginning of McMahon sharing Miss Grant's naked pictures with others, who he encouraged to share with their friends. On March 31st, 2020, Miss Grant expressed concern to McMahon that she had no intention of having sex with these strangers and requested McMahon make that message clear, as she felt threatened and distressed by responses her pictures were getting. She made clear that she did not want any perception of her moving beyond the point of mere fantasy. Shortly after, McMahon surprised Miss Grant with news that he had protected her job from a furlough that WWE would imminently announce. The furlough affected a large number of employees, and McMahon emphasized that he personally made sure that she would not be one of them, reinforcing her dependency on him, particularly after a majority of the support staff in the legal department, all hired prior to Miss Grant, were furloughed. McMahon became the most important figure in Miss Grant's life as he meticulously asserted power and control over almost every aspect of it. Miss Grant's fears intensified over the consequences that could result from McMahon's actions, particularly by sharing her naked pictures. She became paranoid, completely dependent on, and worshipfully devoted to McMahon. He, in turn, pressed forward in exerting his power over Miss Grant as he saw fit. McMahon recruits other men and forces Miss Grant into sex trafficking. In May of 2020, McMahon had recruited an individual whom he manipulatively referred to as his, quote, friend, unquote, to engage in a threesome with McMahon and Miss Grant. The friend turned out to be McMahon's physical therapist at Alternative Clinic and is referred to herein as physical therapist. To induce Miss Grant's participation in the threesome, McMahon began referring to Miss Grant as his girlfriend and sent her a large bouquet of flowers. Nevertheless, on May 8, 2020, Miss Grant expressed apprehension about participating in the threesome. In response, McMahon insisted that the plans were already made and suggested he would lose a friendship if she did not go through with it. On the day of the threesome on May 9th, 2020, Miss Grant showed up to the condo but reiterated that she did not want to go through with the act. She expressed fear of being thrown around like a, quote, rag doll, unquote, by McMahon and physical therapist. After Miss Grant clearly stated she wanted to back out, McMahon responded by telling Miss Grant for the first time that he loved her, stunning her into silence. McMahon's manipulative tactic resulted in the outcome he wanted, and he led her down the stairs to the bedroom where physical therapist was waiting to begin the threesome. Early in the encounter, McMahon immediately directed Miss Grant to lay down on her back in a supplicating position. While straddling over her, McMahon defecated on Miss Grant's head. McMahon left to shower off, but he instructed Miss Grant to remain in place with excrement in her hair and to continue performing for his friend. While Miss Grant requested protection, none was offered. McMahon and physical therapists actively continued with the threesome and directed Miss Grant's sexual performance for around an hour and a half while she was left covered in feces. Following the threesome on May 11, 2020, McMahon sent an explicit message to Miss Grant that further detailed his fantasies of seeing her engaged in sexual relations. The following is an excerpt from that text message purportedly from Vince McMahon to Janel Grant, sent May 11, 2020 at 1:46 p.m. I love it. That's you, Janel. You just can't get enough, can you? In the future, it's going to be so bad that you'll demand to be effed twice a day and not just with blank in a three-way. Why not let others see the beautiful voluptuous body and watch you shake uncontrollably when you blink? They'll go out of their minds. Then I'll find more friends and we'll tie you up so you're helpless. I'll direct them to have their way in any way they want. Who can make you scream, which I think is supposed to be scream, the loudest? Maybe I'll just line them up and have them squirt in your mouth, your blank, all over your blank and blank, all at the same time. You'll be covered in blank and we'll make you eat it all and taste everybody's blank. The next morning, you'll be a little sore, but you're still going to want more. After all of that blanking over and over, and then that is the end of the screenshot. Line 139. McMahon then pressured Miss Grant into several additional threesomes, in large part because she felt she had no other choice, particularly after McMahon's comments that he had personally ensured that she had not lost her job. Her subsequent run-ins with physical therapists at Alternative Clinic also served as a reminder of how much was at stake if she did not obey. McMahon controlled Miss Grant's employment, income, paid for her medical care, circulated naked pictures of her, and ignored her lack of consent for the first threesome. Indeed, when text conversations would begin to cross over from McMahon's fantasies into reality, Miss Grant often attempted to avoid physical encounters with physical therapists, as on September 23, 2020, when she told McMahon that there was no room for a third body. After the threesomes began, McMahon became more sadistic, and his fantasies focused on control, such as choking, sensory deprivation, pain, humiliation, and group scenarios in which Miss Grant was to be physically overwhelmed and subservient. The following is a text message entered as evidence in the complaint, purportedly from Vince McMahon to Janel Grant. R.E., your last picture. You need your panties ripped off in 3 big black blanks in all 3 holes at the same time. Way up your blank and way up your blank as far as they will go and even further. And the thickest blank goes down your throat so that it makes you gag and convulse as those big black blanks pound away. It feels like from the start you're being assaulted, but it's made you blink non-stop. Just one continuous constant orgasm, and just before you pass out, those big black blanks squirt their loads of blank inside of you. As you lay on your stomach, the blank is coming out of all of your holes. I'll turn you over and jack off all over you. That is the end of the text message from Vince McMahon purportedly to Janel Grant. Line 143. On one occasion, he instructed Miss Grant, do not knock on the door, because if I see you, I will rape you in the hallway. To leave no doubt regarding the dynamic of their relationship, on May 12, 2020, McMahon texted Miss Grant, I'm the only one who owns you and controls you. I want to blank you, a theme that was often reiterated throughout their involvement. On June 17, 2020, Miss Grant sent text messages to McMahon noting her 1-year anniversary in joining the WWE. McMahon ignored her. A month later, McMahon reminded Miss Grant about far-reaching results of his texting out explicit content to her. By now, thousands of men see you every day all over the world. They all want to blank you, he said. Around this time, McMahon openly shared explicit photographs and salacious stories about Miss Grant with WWE crew at the tapings, a group McMahon also referred to as her fan club in quotes. Indeed, McMahon exuberantly messaged her a truthful story, quote unquote, of having just shared explicit content of her with a group of 12 men on the WWE tech crew and recounted the obscene details he shared with them. The following is a text message from Vince McMahon purportedly sent to Janel Grant July 21st, 2020 at 8:59 p.m., also entered into the evidence of the complaint. I just passed my phone around to a bunch of guys on the tech crew. They were screaming, "Oh my God, she's blanking beautiful. Look at that ass. I'd love to get that." I paused to count out loud how many guys there were. 12. I then said, "Okay, there's 12 of you. She would love to come blank each and every one of you at one time." The guys cheered, he put in parentheses. "But she will only do it if she takes 3 of them at a time," I said. That brought a huge reaction in parentheses. "She wants one deep in her blank, one all the way down her throat, and one in her blank, and you can pound her and keep on pounding her till you pop your load. She may scream and try to say no, although it would be difficult to say anything with a blank down her throat." Then they laughed, he put in parentheses. I then said, "Listen, no matter what, just pound away till you squirt." Baby, these guys were having a blast with me. Some of them didn't believe me, so I said, "You were the greatest blank in the world, and no matter how much you get, you always wanted more." And then I said, "She loves blank." Baby, these techs, as we will call them, were having the time of our lives listening to my truthful story. I then said you would take a 10-minute break between each blanking, but then you would get back on your hands and knees with your blank in the air and say, "Okay, I'm ready, who's next? LOL. I drove them wild, baby, or I should say you drove them wild. Just imagined if this really happened, baby, how much blank you would have coming out of your holes." That is the end of the text message purportedly sent from Vince McMahon to Janel Grant on this occasion. Line 148. On the occasions when Miss Grant informed McMahon that she was physically injured during their sexual encounter, McMahon's responses varied from apologies to non-accountable pushback and blaming impulse control. When encounters were particularly brutal, Miss Grant learned to bookend the truth of her injuries with compliments to create the least amount of pushback from McMahon. However, Miss Grant sustained brutal and painful injuries, including bleeding, swelling, bruising, and spans of incontinence resulting from Mr. McMahon's forceful use of his fists, adult toys, and objects unsafe for vaginal insertion or penetration. For instance, on August 28, 2020, Miss Grant texted McMahon that she was injured during their latest sexual encounter. As a result of McMahon's insistence on penetrating Miss Grant with extra-large sex toys, including a vibrating wand that caused her to panic, McMahon ignored Mrs. Grant's warning that the device was not meant for insertion and forcefully shoved the wand inside of her so deeply that it became stuck for a period. She texted that she was in pain and bleeding a lot between last night and today. "And I'm on the floor right now because I can't get comfortable," she said. And on August 29th, 2020, she texted him an update that she was still really uncomfortable and "I got hurt in some way that I'm having trouble describing." McMahon did apologize, saying that "sometimes I just get carried away." This is the end of Part 1, page 30 of the WWE complaint from Janel Grant against Vince Kennedy McMahon and John Laurinaitis, as well as WWE. Part 2 coming soon.